An example is to just look at, if you want to paint your house, and then you've got some, you wanted some kind of an idea in terms of how much it would cost. So the first thing that you would perhaps show this house, or even just share some of the details to the painters, is basically the house. So the first question that they might ask is, how many rooms do you have, right? So you say we've got a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and perhaps a hall or a living room. Now, that is important for them to be able to actually say. If it's a very senior or a experienced painter, they might actually say, okay, it would cost roughly about 10,000 pounds or something, right? So this is based on their previous estimate of a similar one, because these persons are really, really very, very knowledgeable, very experienced. They know that this roughly would take. Obviously, they would not be able to commit to that. They'll say, okay, roughly it's about that. Just have this idea. And then the first thing that you would then ask is, okay, how much does it cost? And then you would also ask another important question in terms of how much time will it take for you to paint the full house, or whatever the number of rooms. So you also ask the schedule. You need to understand it. The third thing you might ask is in terms of the resources. Would you bring the paint, or should we buy the paint? How much paint do we need, right? So that's another thing. So if it's a wallpaper, it's completely different. And if you want one quote or 2 quotes of this, that also differs. So your quotation of how much it would cost for your house to be painted really depends on the size of the house. Just imagine if this same painter wants to actually have a look at this house by somebody else, from one of your friends or somebody else. Would they be in the same position to actually give a rough, as they say, finger in the air quote, just by asking the number of, it's just 2 bedrooms and 1 hall kitchen, it would cost 10,000? No. For this kind of a house, they say, I need to have a look into the house. I need to have a look into the house, or show me the photos, show me the plan of the house. If you have got an architecture, whatever it is, then they would actually be able to get to the next level of that. And then perhaps they will schedule a visit to the house, and then be able to look at everything, and then be able to commit. What is the difference between this and that? This is fairly simple, run-of-the-mill solution. The person is experienced, so that's what it is called as a top-down estimate. So it's actually kind of, okay, done deal. But whereas here, it's based on the expert's opinion. Whereas in this context, in the second one on the right, here we're talking about fairly complex, and here where we need the detailing, the details of how many rooms, and what are the dimensions of each room, whether it's a rectangle, a square, do we have to paint the roof, how big is the roof, what is the kind of the structure of this, how many coats of this paint, everything actually detailed here, right? So this is where we need to really get into the specifics, and this is what we call as a work breakdown structure. So this is a bottom-up estimate. So we'll go through this in detail in the context of an IT application development. But this is just to give a fair idea in terms of the concept of estimation. So you've got a top-down estimate, whereas you've got a bottom-up estimation on the right, which is very detailed, which actually goes into the specifics of nuances of the specific piece of work that is involved. So here we're talking about, for example, this person might say, I can't paint this whole house. I'll have to actually get 2 more persons. Hey, by the way, there is another specialist who would actually do the wallpaper. I can't do the wallpaper myself, right? So here you're talking about the resources required in a very detailed context, whereas in this on the left, you're really not bothered too much about the who does what and the specialization, because it's fairly simple. It's a top-down estimate. It's just as a finger in the air kind of thing. That's what it is involved. And bear in mind that the estimates of top-down and bottom-up, they're not going to be equal, obviously, because it's 2 different approaches. So in the same context, we'll have a look at how we can build an e-commerce website. For example, let's take the example of selling mobile accessories, like, for example, the iPhone cases or Samsung Galaxy watches or something like that, the Gear watches. So for example, all of these, the online shop is going to actually sell these accessories. That's the functionality, the main USP of this website. And if you want to build an estimate for, if you want to come up with an estimate for developing, for designing, for developing and deploying this, this particular website. So what's the kind of, what is the kind of approach that we need to take? So obviously you need to understand the first and foremost thing is basically the sizing. We need to understand the size of this. You then have a look at each of the functionality. That's where the backlog comes in. We actually build a backlog in terms of what is involved, what are the functions you need. You might need, for example, you might need a shopping cart. You would need to have a catalog, for instance, a catalog just to show all the various categories of the items. It could be phone cases, it could be the phone screens, covers, and things like that. All of these, so you actually have categories, and each of the categories, you've got the specific products or items. And for each of them, you have the item description, blah, 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 all of that. So the functionality for this is just to show. And from the user point of view, I should be able to actually pick and choose as a customer. I can select an item so that I can add it to my cart. So that's a user story. So that from the context of the e-commerce website. So similarly, you build all of this and then you actually build that website. But to be able to do that, the backlog should, apart from the user stories, it should also have the tasks. The tasks could be, for example, it could be that I need to build a database. I need to have some tables in the database. That is a task. I need to have some wireframes, create wireframes for these, how the site should look like. That's again another task. So all of these tasks, again, are part of the backlog. And then you actually kind of start refining from there. You create epics, you say that I want this big administrative functionality. I want a shopping cart functionality. So within that, you would then say the user stories could be, as a customer, I would like to check out the cart. I would like to actually edit the items in the cart. So that's a story. Another story could be, I would like to actually remove an item completely from the cart so that it doesn't, I'm not proceeding from, in terms of the purchase. So that's again, another functionality from the point of view of a user story. And then the task could be that, it could be database, for example. You need to create a temporary holder for your items that are added to your cart. So you say that, I'll say cart as a kind of a object. And then within cart, you can add items. And then obviously whatever you added doesn't mean that you create an order for that, right? So you need to have a separate entity called order. So cart is a temporary placeholder for all your items. Only when you confirm and check this out, then you would be creating an order. And that will have the final set of, you'll have 10 items in the cart, but then only you'll have 5 of them or 2 of them in the final order. You could have, or you can have all 10, depending on the situation. And then the task could be something like a CRUD case, as what we were discussing the other day. Create, read, update, delete. So the cart could actually have a CRUD. You create a cart, you add different items from the catalog into the cart. That's the creation of a cart. You can review, you can have a look at the cart and say, oh, I don't want to have all these 5. You can delete some. You can modify the number or the quantity of each of those items there. I want 5 of these instead of just 1. I want 5 cases, or I want 2 of them, one for mine and one for my daughter or son. So you would actually like to place 2 items or 2 numbers of the screen protectors. So things like these, you can actually have all of these. So you need to think from the point of view of the customer. So you write some stories from that. And then you think from the point of view of the administrator, you write some stories like that. So then you go on refining the backlog. We're talking about backlog refinement here. And then once that is done, then you actually can have a rough idea in terms of how many stories you have. From there on, we use what we call as planning poker. We're going to get into details later. We would then invite the development team and we'll ask them, hey, take these few bunch of stories and then come up with the user story points for these. So then they look at that particular point and then have a user story and then be able to actually say, I think this is 3, this is 8, this is 13, this is 5, this is 1, because we already have this in the database, blah, blah, blah. So we'll talk about that, the planning poker aspect of it and the estimation, detailed user story point estimation in the next few slides. But if you understand that, you have got at this point of time, it's enough to understand that you've got the estimation done for the stories that you have already done in the backlog. And then these could actually be put in the part in the, in the context of a sprint or an iteration, or this could be actually, part of the big picture product backlog. So then you can actually have, okay, I've got these story points of 8, I've got 5 points, so together 13. I think we should be able to do these because we have got roughly 14 points of capacity still in this particular sprint, as the total velocity is, let's say, 100 story points for this sprint, which is 3 weeks with 2 developers, for example. So you can then manipulate, you can then think in terms of how much spare capacity. These terms are a bit technical, but don't get too bogged down. It's simple. Capacity is the amount of work that you can accommodate in a particular sprint. So let's say, and velocity is the productivity, basically. So how much of capacity you still have in terms of the number of points that you still have. So that is basically, so we'll talk about these in detail as we proceed, but I'm just trying to give an example. And this is how you can actually try and use the estimation in the context of the agile. So you can actually have, say, this is the backlog, and then this is in progress, this is in priority, this is the development, this is done, this is still to be done. So things like that. And these are already deployed. These are still to be deployed. This is the done in acceptance test cases. So you can actually have a kind of a good Kanban board trying to actually go through each of these. So you have a clear picture of where you are and then how much effort is required further to go to the next level where you want to. So all of these actually is accomplished only by estimation. And this is not done at one point of time. Previously, we used to do that before the project started, and then perhaps once or twice during the development stage, and then perhaps as a kind of a post-mortem or post-fact, we do it after the project is done. But then that was the traditional way about 10, 12 years ago. But nowadays, it's all about agile. It's all about how you expect and anticipate changes, how you would be proactive to accommodate all the changes. So now we do estimation pretty much every sprint. During the sprint planning, after the sprint planning is completed, once you have a look at the sprint review, you look at how you've done. The sprint retrospective is when you could actually try and see your estimates, whether they're really too way off or too much, too tight. So you can then accommodate that. You can actually try and adjust your way of working in such a way that you are trying to optimize your estimation as a technique, as a team exercise.